Yo, what's up, you guys? It's your girl, Treaty LPC, and thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of the Self-Aware and Effed Up podcast. I just wanted to, take a pause and say thank you so much for your continued support. Season 3 is off to a great start, and I can't wait for you guys to hear about today's guest. I am really excited to speak with her. We've had to go through all sorts of emails back and forth because we're in 2 different time zones. So this message is going to be world-changing and life-changing that she's going to talk with me about today. Her name is Shalina Lodhia. I hope I said it correctly. If I didn't, she's going to tell you exactly how to say her last name. You guys know I'm big on names. So she is a counselor. She is also a singer, a rapper. She does resume writing. She does a little bit of all of it, but she is going to share with you guys today about her lived experience of navigating through fatherlessness, navigating through intergenerational trauma, as well as being able to navigate through domestic violence situations. So we're going to talk a little bit about her experiences and how her experiences are being used by her within her counseling practice to help others. So without further ado, please welcome to the Self-Aware and Effed Up podcast, Shalina Lodhia. Hey, Shalina, how are you doing? Did I mess up your name too bad?
No. You said it perfect.
Okay. Well, welcome to the show. I really, really appreciate your time. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm excited to be on the podcast. The name resonated with me, and as soon as I saw it, I'm like, I need to get on that.
Well, I'm glad, so glad that you reached out, and so glad we were able to make this happen. I've been looking forward with speaking to you, so I can't wait to hear more about your journey. But we could just go ahead and get started by having you tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
Thank you. So, my name's Shalina. I'm born and raised in Sydney in Australia, and my background is South Asian. I'm Indian. I've recently got into the counselling sphere, so I think it would be since about 2018-19 I've started doing counselling. Started off with career counselling, and it transitioned into domestic violence, and then I realized there is a link between domestic violence and intergenerational trauma, and then I guess I healed from my own trauma, or am healing with my fatherlessness. I decided that I wanted to add that onto the list of things that I help people with as well through my lived experience. So yeah, I've been doing that for a number of years, and I guess I do that to help other people, and I do music and rapping and singing and writing for my own mental health, because we have to have a balance.
Yeah.
It's just no other way. So, and it's just my passion. It takes me away from the world sometimes. So that's sort of me in a nutshell. And then obviously when we go into my childhood, that's the reason why I do what I do now.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to hearing why you do what you do, because so many times that is our story as counselors. We're drawn to this field. So you said you started in career counseling at first. Like, what drew you down that path?
It was my mom. She said to me, because I used to do resumes for my friends, and my mom said, why don't you turn that into a business? And I didn't even think of it. It's interesting how other people see your potential more than you see your own sometimes.
Right.
That's how it happened. And then I thought, you know what, I actually like this. And I'm pretty good at picking out what people should be doing in their careers. So that's why I started off with that. But then I wanted something more meaningful. And then after a while, I realized within my community, there's a lot of, lack of awareness. There's a knowledge gap when it comes to domestic and family violence, and what all the different types of, all the forms. And some people don't realize they're going through that. And I think I wanted to get into that sphere because my mother faced domestic violence at the hands of my dad.
Wow.
So as a result, I've always I guess that has been my world, and that's been my mom's world, domestic violence. And my mom's also been through emotional abuse. I've been through domestic violence with one of my exes. So I really wanted to help the community, help the Indian community as such, because in my culture, mental health is not something we talk about enough at all. Like, Indian people and mental health, they're not in the same sentence. So I wanted to shed light on that and actually help women who are facing it, because, it's, you shouldn't have to face such a thing. Like, you don't deserve that. But a lot of women, they don't realize that they're even suffering. They don't realize what they're going through. It's not right. And they stay because they don't see a way out. So I wanted to be that light for them.
Okay, good. I really love that. I'm all about like empowering our communities because, if you don't take on that mantle, if you don't do it, then who else is going to kind of provide that light? And I love, that you are using your experiences to help other people. So you said that like sometimes people may be in those domestic violence situations and they don't even realize it. What are some of those things that you kind of help them realize when it comes to those domestic violence situations?
I think a few major ones are they go through financial abuse. They're being controlled financially, but they think that the women think that's normal because they think, oh, my husband's the caretaker. My husband looks after everything. They don't see that their husband withholding money from them, not allowing them to spend, or forcing them to have a joint bank account with them, forcing them to give them their salaries. Some of these women didn't realize that was financial abuse. They thought they had to do that because they had to do as their husband said.
Wow.
And then you break it down, it's like, wait a minute, if you don't have financial independence and freedom, if you can't use your money the way you want to, if you can't have your own bank account and you're not allowed to, that's actually financial abuse.
Yeah.
And then they realize, oh God, like I don't have the money to leave. They can't leave these relationships because they had given all their money away, or they had they weren't allowed to work, or they were forced to go to work but give the money to their husband. So there's so many aspects of financial abuse. The other one that's very common is marital rape. A lot of these women are forced into having sex with their husbands and they don't know, and that's a form of domestic violence. And a lot of women have, if they don't, their husbands don't talk to them. Their husbands give them the silent treatment, or the husbands get angry at them. That's another form. Another form that women don't realize is immigration abuse. So when the husbands have married them for their visa, or they're threatening to deport their wives, threatening that if the wives don't do as they say, they're going to inform the immigration and kick them out of the country. And a lot of them are threats because that's not, in Australia, that's not how the law actually works. But the women aren't aware of that. So those are just a few that some of these women are going through, but they don't know that that's not right. That's not what it should be like in a relationship.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, you're kind of like teaching me some things. Like, of course, I'm not familiar with the immigration laws as it relates to Australia, but I do think it's important that they are able to kind of educate themselves on those sort of things. So it's interesting that in this era of life that is still something that people can kind of use to abuse someone, especially given the fact that there is so much information out there for people to be able to search on the web. So I love that you highlight those things.
Yeah, I have to, because they're not aware, or some of these women are just not allowed to access their phones. Like times they have to hide it from their husbands sometimes, or they can't make phone calls. So they're really isolated and they don't know where to start in order to educate themselves. They don't know where to start, who to talk to. So I guess I try and be that starting point and really educate them from the start until, until whatever it is they want to do. Do they want to leave or stay or whatever it is? I help them along just to educate them. Otherwise, they don't know. Knowledge is power. So if you don't have knowledge on these things, you won't be able to make an informed decision on your own life.
Right. Okay. So, I mean, that definitely makes a lot of sense, that you don't have access to the information, or if you're being guarded from the information. And I love that you highlighted the isolation piece, because I feel like even outside of the particular population that you're working with, I feel like that's something I see just in DV victims along. And I hate to use the word victim, but I mean, I think that sometimes we have to name what is happening. They are being victimized in some ways. And, we want to call that out. But that is a key thing that happens, is that they are isolated from their support systems. And that, I think that also plays into, the intergenerational trauma. Do you see a linkage there in terms of like what you're seeing culturally with some people who are experiencing DV, and that tying back into the intergenerational trauma that you spoke about earlier?
Yeah, I think different cultures experience intergenerational trauma differently. And it goes back into, your childhood, your parents, their parents, and how all of them are raised. So if your parents, say, for example, my mom went through trauma with her mother. Right. So, and And if I didn't link the traumas, I wouldn't know why my mum is behaving the way she's behaving right now. And if I didn't know she went through domestic violence, I wouldn't be able to tell, is she repeating those behaviors or has she healed from it? So it's so important to go back into your timeline to find out what everybody went through to be able to understand why you're going through what you're going through right now, why you're suffering, why they're behaving the way they're behaving. So I guess when it comes to domestic and family violence, it's usually men who are more of the perpetrators than the women. So family, how are they raised? What was their mother like? What was their father like? Did their father repeat the same behaviors? Did their mom treat them like crap? Like where did all this stem from? And when I look back in my own culture, there's patriarchy is just so embedded in Indian culture. A lot of these men they actually don't think what they're doing is wrong. They don't see it as abuse. They see it as normality. They don't see it as controlling the finances to be financial abuse. They think, well, I'm the man. This is what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to, go to work, and she's supposed to be the housewife. They don't see it as they don't see it as it being the wrong thing to do to your wife. Like, this is 2024, not 1924, where women were
that part.
Right? Like, it's such a time.
Yeah. And that's what I was thinking, because you were talking about like them going to work and giving their paychecks. And I'm like, okay, that worked when women were not working, but this is just,
It is still happening. It's crazy. When I started helping women and women started telling me their stories, in my head, I'm like, well, wait a minute, you give them your money? Why do you give them your money?
Right.
Like, what is going on? And then I realized where their mindset came from. It was what they saw their parents do, or what was ingrained into their minds by their mothers or fathers, or what their husbands have expected, or the husbands have taken advantage of the patriarchy and they're still winning. And that's why these women are still suffering because of that. But I would say that there's the men that afflict that type of trauma on their wives, domestic violence, pertaining to domestic violence, I think they've gone through their own trauma, or they don't have that awareness. They were never taught. They have no idea, or they know what they're doing is wrong, but they feel like they have nothing to lose, because a lot of perpetrators of domestic violence, they're not going to swear and hit a police officer. Exactly. They're not going to do that with their bosses. They probably won't do that in front of their friends. So in places they've got to lose something, they'll contain themselves. But when it comes to the home front, they probably feel like they don't have anything to lose. Their wife is not going to go anywhere. They unleash on her. So that's another thing that I've noticed. A lot of these men, they're very good at controlling themselves in a public setting.
Right.
Then they come and unleash themselves at home as well. And they may have seen their fathers do that, perhaps.
Yeah, I definitely think you have a point there, because I think a lot of people know how to pull it together in certain situations in order to avoid, trouble. And to me, that says, that what you're doing is not acceptable or not right if you are able to clean it up when you're in front of people. So there's definitely, there's definitely a lot there that I think that people have to examine. But I do think that, from an intergenerational kind of standpoint, a lot of things don't change unless one generation holds the other generation accountable.
Yes, they do. And you don't necessarily have to. It's not really about anger. It's about going back into your history and your timeline with a really open mind, just to understand, not to shift blame. So if you go back there and you start hitting up your mom and your dad, like, you did this, my grandparents did this, and you start doing that, you won't heal. But if you look at it like, okay, they didn't have the tools and the resources at that point in time to heal from the trauma, whatever trauma they went through, then I guess we have to have a lot of mercy on our ancestors when we're trying to break that pattern of domestic violence, of intergenerational trauma. Because we now have the tools to understand what it is, but our parents, they probably haven't even heard of the term intergenerational trauma. Like, my family didn't. They were like, what is this girl talking about? What is she on about? Like, it made no sense to them. I had to explain it to them. And I don't think they still understand.
Yeah. I mean, but it's something like, because I'm curious to know more about how you even got to that point of being able to examine it, because I feel like there's so many people that don't dig deep. They don't ask the why this happened or why this person maybe treated this person this type of way. But I feel like a lot of times, even though there is information, the the previous generations are not being held accountable to change. It's like, just because something has been the status quo doesn't mean it should continue. And with you breaking it, I want to know, one, how did you even discover this is what's going on? And what steps are you taking to kind of break those kind of patterns that you've noticed?
I think we need to first, I guess, understand the meaning of trauma, which is your reaction to your mental, physical, or spiritual reaction to an event that you find distressing. So your reactions can be, you know, like for example, events of trauma can be things like family violence, abuse, racism, intergenerational trauma, loss of work, friendships, grief. All these things are trauma-inducing events. So when we go through that, our coping mechanisms with that might be violence, abuse, alcohol, drugs. We find coping mechanisms like that. And we also start feeling things like anger or sadness, but we might even turn to gambling. We might feel depressed. We might feel isolated. We might turn to abuse as a way to release the trauma that we went through. So it's like a cycle. So when these reactions or behaviors, thoughts, they're passed down from one generation to the other. And it's intergenerational because a lot of these traumas, they're usually unacknowledged, and they're not sometimes not realized by the person who's suffering. And some of these people don't realize they're going through trauma. They think it's just a normal event that happens in life, and this is how you deal with it. They don't know what the difference is between dealing with trauma like normally through healing, or dealing with it with a bottle, dealing with it with drugs, dealing with it by lashing out at people. That's their way of dealing with the trauma. So the reason why we still have trauma and intergenerational trauma, we're facing it in our lives, is because the generation before us and before them, they didn't have the awareness or the knowledge and they didn't have the tools or the resources or the therapies, you know, that we now have. The only reason why I started figuring all this out, and I figured it out when I was young, but I didn't know there was a term for it, which is intergenerational trauma. I didn't even know that. I started learning about my grandmother's trauma and her mother, and I realized in my lineage, because like I don't have my dad, so I've only got my mom's side, right? My grandmother, my mom's mother, went through trauma as a child. She was the oldest of 14 kids, and she had to take on the role of a mother from a very young age. So she never got to experience a childhood. That's a grief. That's a loss of innocence, loss of childhood. That's a grief grief of not being able to have a normal life, along with whatever other abuse that she suffered. And her mother, her mother's mother died when she was very young. So my great-grandmother, my grandmother's mother, didn't have a mother. So she experienced grief and loss as well because she never had a mom. And then, so when I'm going down the lineage of my mom, and my mom didn't have a great relationship with my grandmother, that's still grief and loss. It's a grief of connection. It's a grief of not being able to have the love from a mother that my mom should have had. So when I'm going back, there's this pattern and cycle of grief and loss and maybe resentment, maybe feelings of betrayal, feelings of unworthiness. And I started connecting the dots like, oh, wow, this is why my grandmother treats my mom like this. This is why my great-grandmother was like this to my mom, because they didn't have healthy relationships with their mothers.
Yeah.
My mom didn't with her mother. Her mother didn't have it with her mother because my great-grandmother was busy popping out 14 kids. My grandmother,
she's busy.
She got busy, man. So, and then my great-grandmother's mother died when she was young, so she didn't have a mother figure. So everybody was just trying to cope with things in their own ways. It was said that my great-grandmother, the only time my great-grandfather was nice to her was when she was having kids. There's so many different things that I heard. But when I started connecting all the dots, I was like, wow, like everybody's grieving a loss of something. Yeah. That's just my pattern. Somebody else's pattern could be they've copped a lot of physical abuse from generation to generation. They could have copped a lot of maybe there was alcohol involved,
Yep.
your parents, their parents, and the alcohol thing was passed down. But with alcohol comes abuse and so many other losses when your life is just turned to alcohol. So there was just, it took me years to work this out because I didn't know the term intergenerational trauma at that point. And I'm talking 10 years ago.
Gotcha.
And then now when I learned about it a few years back, intergenerational trauma, when I started learning about it, everything clicked. And I was like, wow, we really need to go revisit our childhoods. We really need to go into our parents' childhoods. We need to go into our grandparents' childhoods to see what shaped them and why they are the way they are. There's a thing called a genogram. And this is what people need to start implementing if they want to heal from intergenerational trauma. It's like a family tree, but with a genogram, you have pretty much your family history as well as medical history, any deaths that have happened, any mental health issues that you're aware of. And for each person in your family, if you expand on it to find out, it's like a mini biography, everything they went through. When you start writing that out about all of your family members, that's when everything will start making sense. Did they go through poverty? Did they go through abuse? Did they go through sexual abuse? Did they go through domestic violence? Did they have a cycle of grief in their lives? Were they raised by a single mother? When you start writing this out about learning about your family and writing it out and connecting all the dots between all your family members, then everything's going to make sense to you.
Yeah, that sounds like a great 10th grade science project. No, just but no, it definitely sounds like, I know I had to do that in the 10th grade for some reason for a biology class, but not to the degree that you're laying it out there. But
yes.
But I do think it's important to kind of explore that. I mean, I don't think I've gone that deep into my family history, but at the surface level, I understand why my dad did some of the things that he did. I understand why my mom does some of the things that she does. And, but I do think it's important to examine those patterns and the different things that are passed from generation to generation. But I do want to kind of shift gears a little bit because you kind of highlighted one of the other areas of your life. We talked before the show about your lived experience. And one of the things that came up was around fatherlessness, and that being something that has kind of shaped your career in terms of you being able to help people along this vein. Are you open to kind of sharing a little bit about that part of your journey and what that was like for you growing up?
Yeah. My father hasn't been in my life since I was a child. So pretty much 30 and a half years, I've never had him because he had married my mom for visa. And he got that, there was domestic violence involved and he nearly killed my mom. And and then my mom had to pack her bags overnight. And I was 15 months old and she had to leave. And so after that, I never had him, and I don't remember him as a child either because I was 15 months old. I don't really have much to remember.
Yeah.
So I grew up without him, and it was just such a weird, abnormal experience. But what I didn't realize is that the whole time what I was experiencing was grief, because in my head I was feeling anger, I was feeling resentment. I was like, why doesn't he love me? Why isn't he here? Why doesn't he care? And then it wasn't until I got much older that I realized all of these emotions are actually tied to grief, because grief is not just death. It's the absence of something or someone.
Right.
But it was a very, when you talk about self-aware and fucked up, that's me. I'm self-aware of how I am not having a dad, or the daddy issues. Some people, they call it. And, and that was the thing that fucked me up, was not having a dad amongst anything else in my life. It was that. So I didn't know how many aspects of it affected me, and it's psychologically, but it's spiritually, financially, with my mum being a single parent, academically. I mean, I got kicked out of school. I didn't care about school. I didn't want to be there. Yeah.
These little rebels.
I know, who would have thought? And then it fucks you up, I guess, sexually as well. You're using sex as a way to validate yourself and your self-worth and your self-love. There's so many ways that I was affected by not having a dad. But until I started, I guess, healing, as they say, I didn't know that. I just thought I'm going to be like this for life. But now it's more like you learn to manage the emotions that come with not having a dad. But I don't think you ever really truly heal from it. I don't think that you ever just are not having one. I think you learn how to manage not having one. There's such a big difference between the two. So once I realized all the different ways fatherlessness affects you, all the different forms of fatherlessness, like mine was abandonment, but other people have fatherlessness in the sense that their dad might be incarcerated. The father might have died. The father has moved interstate. So there's different forms of fatherlessness, and there's different ways it affects you. So it's very complex, the effects of it. But yeah, I do help my clients with it. But if they come to me and say, "Oh, I want to get over it and I want to forgive and forget and move on," I'll be like, "Sorry, I haven't reached the state of forgiveness now, but I can tell you how to cope with your your emotions. I can help you with that or decoding it, but I can't tell you how to forgive and forget and move on because that's not me. I can't do it."
No, I think that that's definitely understandable. And I love that you're honest with people, because it is a lifelong kind of process to get through that, to get to a place of forgiveness. But I am curious to kind of know, like, because again, it sounds like you had a little bit of a rebellious stage. And I'm sure that with the anger came other feelings that go underneath the anger. A lot of times it's sadness or depression. Like, how did you get to a place of, maybe you could tell me where you are in your grief cycle now. I was going to say get to acceptance, but that's me making an assumption that that's where you are. But how did you navigate to get to this better place that you seem to be in as it relates to reconciling him not being there and you still being the strong person that you are?
I think I was doing a lot of self-destructive behaviors. I was drinking a lot. I used him as a reason to drink, as a reason for my fucked up behaviors, attention-seeking behaviors, self-harming. I did all that. And he was my reason for that because I felt like I was so unloved by him. Like I was so abandoned. I was like, why did he do that? So I took out the anger. I took it out on myself but I think I also sabotaged relationships as well with men because I guess it was just the way that I viewed myself, really. And I would get like attached, or I would, I think I used sex as an escape as well. So I did all that, and it got to a point, it was during COVID, like a couple of years ago, 2020, that I was like, nothing's serving me anymore. Like, it's not working, clearly, because I used to think to myself, one day I'm going to wake up and this is no longer going to hurt me. Then you realize that you don't just wake up one day and things don't just stop hurting you. You have to do something about it. Not that I was constantly thinking about my dad 24/7, but I just thought that it'll go away itself, but it didn't. And then I'm like, okay, I probably need to do something about this. So I started seeing like a psychologist and a counselor, but funnily enough, it didn't benefit me because you go there and they're like, the first thing they said to me was like, have you thought of forgiveness? And I'm like, are you serious? What? Like, you start with this? How does it work? So because of that, I was like, okay, stuff this. I have to do it my way because clearly going to psychologists and counselors, it made me feel worse than it did better. But the only one thing a psychologist said to me that resonated with me was that my father never had the intention to be a father. His intention was something else. So once that sort of ingrained in my mind that, okay, it wasn't me, it was him. His intention was to be a father. I think that sort of got the ball rolling, that one sentence. And then from there, it was just, okay, I can't use him as a reason to react so strongly to things. I can't use him as a reason to drink. I can't keep using him as a reason because he's not getting affected by this. It's only me who's getting affected.
Right.
It's not him. He's busy. He's got his own life. He's got his own family. And it was just slowly, once I realized all the different forms of fatherlessness and the effects of it, once I started doing all this research and then learning about intergenerational trauma, like going in depth into it, I think that's what kickstarted the healing process. Also talking to other people and joining forums where there are other women who also didn't have a father. I guess it was the validation that helped me heal when you know you're not the only one. So when that happened, I was like, I started sort of not drinking for the wrong reasons, not, relying on men to fill a void that they cannot fill because it's not possible. They can be understanding, but they can never be that father that I was looking for. Also accepting the fact that I'm probably just not going to forgive him, and I don't have to, and it doesn't make me a bad person. I used to think that I had to forgive him. Now I'm like, okay, I don't need to, and I'm okay with that. I'm at peace with it. So I guess my anger and also learning about realizing that actually what I experienced my whole life was grief. I think my emotions to do with him, my anger, my resentment, I think it's just parked. It's sedentary. It's parked. I can't go anywhere with my pain or my trauma. It's just there. It's parked. I can't. It's not going any higher. I'm not any more angry at him. I might be maybe a little less angry, but it's just there. And I think that's the thing with healing. Like sometimes there's just no other place to go at the point in time in your life, wherever you're at. Like for me, I can't go anywhere anymore. This is where I am at with it. So, and just not reacting to it strongly. Like I don't cry over it. I don't get angry. I don't get mad. I just think like, you know what? I still have a good life. Like he's not going to have control over it. So, but that's years of like, giving yourself therapy, or years of doing research, years of emotional regulation, and being strong enough not to do self-destructive behaviors. It takes time to get there, but you do.
Yeah. No, you've had quite a journey, and I really, a lot of what you said really resonated with me. Our stories are a little bit different in that my father was definitely present. It was my mom that wasn't present for a certain period of my life because she was incarcerated. And then we just never got really to a great place. And so it's kind of navigating that and rebelling. And so I can definitely relate to a lot of that part of your experience, not your full experience. So it does take a lot to work through and get to a place of forgiveness. And for me, I know that for me, it was kind of like, oh, I think I've forgiven. And then, because she was in my life, like it's just take that one little thing to make me restart the whole process over again. And so for those that are listening, I hope that they hear what you said and it really kind of settles into them that they don't have to forgive this person. If it's not impacting them in a negative way, you don't have to let go of it, but if it's something that is like stuck, it's not just parked, but it's really impacting your life on a day-to-day, then I would encourage at that point, you may want to do, something a little bit differently for those that are listening. But I really appreciate you being so honest and sharing your journey. I'm curious, like you work with a lot of different, types of lived experiences that people have gone through. What kind of, I guess, advice would you give to those that are listening that may be facing any of those challenges right now?
I think you need to be bold enough to actually ask for help and not live in that fear that you have to, for example, if you're in a domestic violence situation, not think that I'm stuck here for life. Or if you're going through fatherlessness, not think that, hey, I'm stuck in this with these emotions for life once again, or going through, decoding your intergenerational trauma that you think that you won't be able to heal. I think it's giving yourself that, I guess that grace and that empathy that, hey, I'm going to get through it. Like you have to give yourself that strength because at the end of the day, only you have you. Like nobody else has you the way you're going to support yourself and be there for yourself. So you have to take time out for yourself to do what you need to do, as in look after yourself physically, mentally, emotionally, but also reach out to the right places for help. Don't give up just because like one person couldn't give you the right support. There's so much support out there that it's free. It's on the internet. Like you don't have to pay for these things half of the time. If it's not about the money, but it's all there for you, all these resources. There's no excuse to not have your life in your own hands. Don't give it away to other people to control you. Like you've got the power, you've got the tools, you've got the resources. You don't have an excuse to not look after your mental health or your physical. So you have to be tough on yourself. If I wasn't tough on myself, I wouldn't have got to here. I had to be. It was hard, but it was worth it. You think you can't do it, but you can. It's just baby steps. towards it, but reach out for help, really. And it sounds cliche when people say that, or reach out for help, but don't stop if the first place, the second or the third place couldn't help you. You keep going till you get the help that you need in whichever aspect it is that you're looking for.
Gotcha. Wow. Yeah. Getting help is hard for a lot of people. So I love that piece of advice, because there are so many people that feel like, especially, in coming from those type of situations, they may feel like there is no help out there for them. And so I love that you express that, because you don't have to do it alone. If you're listening, you don't have to try to do this thing called life alone, because there is so much out there and so much support that you can get. So I really appreciate you, expressing that. So Shalina, I do really appreciate your time. This has been an absolute pleasure speaking with you and hearing a little bit more about your story. Before we get into, I'm going to roll these two things up into one. Before we get into you sharing how people can connect with you, is there anything else you want to share with the audience about your journey, or anything that you think could help them?
Ooh, no, not exactly. I feel like I've said what I wanted to say, but just, you have to look after yourself physically, mentally, and spiritually. It's holistic. It's not just your mental health. It's also your physical. It's also your spiritual, or, whatever path you follow, just being a good person. It's not about believing in God or, whatever. Just, it's all these aspects in one. So don't think that, I looked after my mental, everything's fine. You make sure you look after all three aspects, because that's when you get to lead a fulfilling life. Not just, I went to a counselor and my head's fine. You want to live long, you want to have a happy life. You have to look after yourself in all ways possible. And don't be afraid to take time out for yourself. I think some people think it's cliche, like self-love and taking out time for yourself to do things you love, but you need to do that to recharge and rejuvenate. So don't think that you're, being too princessy or being too much or too extra. It's not like that. We all need to recharge. So do that if you need to.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So how can people connect with you?
You can find me on Instagram and TikTok as Counselor Shalina. That's my username. On Facebook, it's just my name, Shalina Lodhia. And on YouTube, what's my YouTube link? I forgot now. I think if you search up Shalina Lodhia, it'll come up. I don't use YouTube that much, but you can find me there, or just send me a DM if anything resonates, or if you want to talk about anything more, you want to learn more about intergenerational trauma. It's a bit hard to explain it in a short segment. Everybody's journey is so different that their traumas will be different, and intergenerational trauma will affect them differently. So yeah, if there's anything you want to talk about, just send me a message. Your mental health matters now and always, so don't neglect it.
All right. I love that. Your mental health matters now and always. So Shalina, again, thank you so much for your time. Guys, please make sure that you can connect with Shalina. All of the information of how you can contact her will be in the description of this episode. Also, be sure to follow me, Tree the LPC, on all social media platforms under the handle Tree the LPC. Until next time, be safe, be well, and make sure that you take care of your mental health.